Okay, hopefully you have your osseous tissue notes with you. We're going to go ahead and start out at the very top of the notes here. And the first things that are mentioned are functions of osseous tissue. And I listed 5 functions. The first is support for the soft tissues, offers a place for anchoring of the tissues and organs. They can anchor onto a frame just like your car has a frame, and you mount things like your wheels and your seats and your steering wheel to that frame. Well, it offers a frame we call the skeletal system, and it's a place for anchoring of tissues and organs. It protects the delicate structures, like the cranium. Your skull is the protective osseous structure for protecting your brain. Your vertebrae protect your spinal cord, and your ribs, your rib cage, protects your lungs and your heart. Those don't need to be pushed on or touched. Leverage, we will have a little bit of exposure to leverage later, of how the joints have muscles across them, and the different joints have different leverage capabilities. We have first, second, and third class levers in our body. Storage area for minerals. Yes, you have calcium and phosphate that are components of the compact bone and spongy bone, and then you have fat, which can occupy the inside of the medullary cavity of the bone. Blood cell formation, you've heard of that before, where you have people who are on bone marrow donor lists. The bone marrow is inside of the bones. This is where blood cells are formed, red and white blood cells and platelets. Hematopoiesis is the formation of cells. And I have osteocytes. An osteocyte is a mature bone cell. So we're going to see that there are other forms of a bone cell, that they have different functions. Some build bone, some break down bone, and when they are isolated by themselves, they've already built up all the matrix around them, the compact bone, and they're living cells that are trapped in that bone. They're called osteocytes. So it says they lay down calcium hydroxide and calcium phosphate matrix. It's called hypoxyapatite. The matrix gives the osseous material its hardness. It's 2/3 calcium phosphate, calcium carbonate, and mineral salts, and 1/3 collagen fibers. Remember, collagen fibers are for strength and support. The reason that your skin is so firm right now is because you're young and you have some fibroblast fiber formers that are putting a lot of collagen into your tissues, your bones and your other tissues, your skin, and it gives those tissues their strength. As you get older, the fibroblasts start breaking down or dying off, and you have less and less collagen fibers. That's why your grandparents are a lot softer than you are and a little bit more brittle than you are. Anatomy of a long bone. Now on your notes, I have some terms, but let's look at the terms over here. Epi means upon. Epi, upon. Physis, the word physis means growth. And dia means between or through. So when we look at these words that you have blanks on, the first one is diaphysis. This is the shaft of a long bone. It says through growth or growth between. The shaft of a long bone is the diaphysis, and you can see it's bracketed here. Epiphyses, epi, upon, physis, growth. These are upon the growth plates. Now this one's already fused here, but that's the growth plate there, and there would be a growth plate down here also. So the proximal epiphysis is closest to the trunk of your body, the main point of attachment, your shoulder. So that's called the proximal epiphysis. Down toward your elbow is the distal epiphysis. It's further away from the point of attachment. So epiphyses means growth. Now, you have the epiphyseal line here, which used to be called one of two things, and the blank here Let me spell that. It's metaphysis, metaphysis. It means between growth. It's the growth plate, basically, the growth center. And most of the time, you call that the epiphyseal disc. It's a hyaline cartilage disc here, responsible for elongation of your bones. So it says located between the proximal and distal epiphyses. There it is, between the proximal epiphysis and the diaphysis, and the distal epiphysis and the diaphysis. Here you have another one here. So the epiphyseal plates, or the metaphysis, those are your growth plates. It says at puberty, the sex hormones, estrogens and testosterone, begin to ossify these areas. These plates, originally the epiphyseal disc, your growth plates, were hyaline cartilage. Once you start producing hormones, this hyaline cartilage becomes ossified, becomes bone, converted to bone, and you see an epiphyseal line. So you stop growing. So during your growth years, your puberty, these growth plates are depositing bone from the epiphysis area toward the shaft of the long bone on both ends. And so your bones get longer. That's how your arms get longer and your legs get longer for getting you taller. Now over here on the side, we're going to see this in just a minute, probably on your next slide again, but let's just look at something. Articular cartilage. You can see this blue material on the surface here, and they've got it labeled over here for your shoulder. The ends of long bones are covered with hyaline cartilage, and that's your articular cartilage. Let's look at your next slide. Yeah, I have it boxed here for you. Articular cartilage, the ends of the long bones. And down here is more articular cartilage. See, it's light blue? These are areas where the bones articulate, where the joints are. Now, you can see a little bit here, and we're going to look at this on another slide. This is the covering of the bone called the periosteum. And I have it boxed up here and it's shaded. Periosteum, it means around. Peri means around, and osteum means bone. So the word means around the bone. A fibrous covering around the bone. So you can see it's right there. And there are two layers. The number one there is a fibrous layer that's on the outside. That's going to be collagen on the outside. It says the outer connective tissue, collagen, contains blood vessels, lymph vessels, and nerves. And then the inner surface is the osteogenic layer. Osteogenic, osteo bone, genic forming. The bone forming layer. These cells are going to be depositing bone on the surface of the shaft here. So it says bone production. The innermost layer contains blood vessels, elastic fibers, and osteoblast. Osteoblast. Osteoblasts. We'll get to that word in just a minute. But those are bone forming cells. So these are osteoblasts here, responsible for new bone growth and repairs such as a break or a fracture. Now this periosteum serves as a place for muscle attachment, for tendons. So when a muscle attaches to a bone, it's actually attaching to this periosteum. Not the bone itself, but the covering of the bone, the periosteum. You may have seen this in football. I know I have. And I've seen it on the Olympics where a football player overstresses himself, or a weightlifter overstresses himself, and the muscle is pulled off of the bone. And when it does that, it's like a window shade. It just shortens real quickly. And you see a bulge. It has to be attached, surgically reattached. Now the medullary cavity. Medullary cavity. Medulla is the center, the marrow cavity, or the center of an organ. Well, this bone here has a hollowed out cavity here that oftentimes has fat in it, and it's called the medullary cavity. So your definition, the space inside the diaphysis contains fat. yellow marrow. That's the medullary cavity. We have the endosteum. This is going to be on the inside of the bone, so it's the medullary cavity's lining of osteoblast. And again, we're going to talk about them again. Here it is down here, the word osteoblast. Also contains another one called osteoclast, which will define those. Oh, that's the next thing we're going to define, is all those three words. So the endosteum is the inside lining that has two types of cells in there, osteoblasts and osteoclasts. So let's see what those two terms are here. The first one is osteocyte, and I've boxed it right here. Osteocyte, O-S-T-E-O-C-Y-T-E. A mature osteoblast. Okay. An osteoblast is a bone-forming cell, no longer active, laying down the matrix. The matrix was the hard calcium phosphate matrix that makes your compact bone hard. And so it's laid that down all around it, and now it's isolated. So it's not making bone anymore. It's not building up bone anymore, and it's called a mature bone cell called an osteocyte. Well, let's go back one and look at osteoblast. Blast is a builder, so it's a bone builder. A type of osteocyte which functions in laying down bone minerals like the calcium and phosphate. So osteoblast, when a bone cell is an osteoblast, it's building or laying down bone. Up at the top, osteoclast, it means bone breaker. These are cells that will break down the calcium phosphate matrix for the body to use, possibly. If the blood level is low, it'll remove calcium and phosphate from the bone by breaking it down, and it goes into the bloodstream. So your definition, osteoclast, bone breaker, a type of osteocyte which functions in breaking down bone and releasing its minerals. All right, so you know that there are three osteo terms. A mature bone cell is an osteocyte, like right there on the left, osteocyte. A bone builder is an osteoblast. It's laying down new bone tissue, like to repair a break or even to build bone. And an osteoclast is a bone breaker, breaking it down for your use in your bloodstream or cleaning up an area that was broken and getting rid of the fragments can be repaired. We have several types of bone here we're going to look at. The first is compact bone. That's already in your notes. And this is the compact bone. The hard outer covering of a bone is compact bone. So the dense outer bone tissue provides a great amount of support and strength to the bone. This is on the outside of your long bones, let's say. Can withstand forces several times the body weight due to the arrangement of the mineral matrix and collagen fibers. I told you that there were collagen fibers in here previously, right? The bone is thicker in the shaft than it is in the ends. So let's look at this diaphysis here. Here's the shaft, and here's the compact bone here, the thick outer wall, and then the spongy inside. And it does look real spongy, real open because of the way that the bone is arranged in there. And we'll get to that word in just a minute. So it's thicker in the diaphysis, in the shaft, than it is in the epiphyses, in the swollen ends of the long bones. Now, spongy bone, that's your next word, spongy bone. That's very cavernous due to the arrangement of osseous trabeculae. Trabeculae are beams. The word means beam, and that's your next fill in the blank, is trabeculae, the word beam. Filled with red marrow. So the red marrow is going to be in this spongy bone area here. The ends of the long bones, you're going to have some bone marrow in there. Abundant in the ends of long bones and irregular bones that we'll talk about later. So trabeculae, there it is in the box. It means beam, a network or lattice of fine plate-like strands of bone. And you can see that it does make it spongy like a regular sponge even. Looks like that. The network space is filled with red marrow. It's highly vascularized, and you can see there's a blood supply going in there. Just show a little one there. To nourish the osteocytes and the cells of the red bone marrow to produce cells, because this bone marrow produces your cells. Now, blood vessels have to get into these bones, and you can see that they're doing it right here, and you're doing it over here. So let's look at your next slide. Out here, perforating canals. These are holes in the bone that blood vessels can travel through to get into your bone, your compact bone. And the definition we have on our notes, lateral foramen which penetrate the compact bone. So they're going in. All these are perforating canals going lateral. Contain blood vessels and could contain nerves. They connect to the central canals. Now you see that there are circular structures here that we're going to talk about in a minute. And in the center of them, there's a canal that a blood vessel goes up through. So they connect to the central canals. The blood vessel goes up through a hole in the middle of this circular structure, and that's called the central canal, to supply nutrients to the cells. Now, these structures here, these circular structures here, and you can see one over here on the far right. Here's a single one here. These are called osteons. So you have, let's look at your first notes, haversian or central canals, and they don't call these haversian canals anymore like they do right here. See, central canal, they don't call them haversian anymore. Haversian is a person's name. That's going to be where the central canal is, haversian canal. But again, try to get away from that, naming it haversian. The center of an osteon. So the center of an osteon, and there's the word there in the red box, the center of that circular arrangement, called an osteon, is where the central canal is. Now, if you look at an osteon, now they've pulled it up here to the far upper right, and you can see the layers here. There are circular rings of bone, of compact bone there, called lamella, L-A-M-E-L-L-A. Lamella means layered or sheets. Like you have laminated plywood. There are layers of wood going one direction, like lengthwise, and then the next layer is going across the board, and then the next layer goes lengthwise, and the next layer goes across. So these are lamella. These rings are called lamella. The concentric rings of the osteon consist of hardened matrix of calcium and phosphates. Yes. Now we have down here at the bottom, they don't have one labeled at the top, but down here at the bottom, I don't even have it boxed, interstitial lamella. You can see that it's not circular. And even up here, this is not circular here either. This is a partial circle. So interstitial lamella, which we could probably see on this slide here a little bit better. It's a little bit larger. Interstitial lamella. See, they're partials. They're not circular osteons like this is. So interstitial lamella, partial or incomplete osteons due to a shift in the bone stress. They're not usually connected to the osteon around them. So when you have a change in the stress on your bone, like from a sitting job to a standing job, your bones are going to realign. And these osteons are going to be reconfigured, and it may build one up over to the side, and the one that was there is lost, and a new one is built to give you the maximum support for standing in that job now. Now in the center, the space that the osteocyte occupies is called a lacuna, L-A-C-U-N-A. And L-A-C-U-N-A-E is plural. So in your notes I have lacunae, little lake, the space which the osteocyte occupies. Now, this is an example. This is a hard material, right? And the cell has a location in there that it's living in, so it occupies a space. The space is called the lacuna. When I was little, my mom used to make a dessert, and it was Jell-O with fruit cocktail in it. And here's an example. If the grapes in that fruit cocktail were osteocytes, and the Jell-O was this matrix, if you cut it open and you removed that cell, you would have a hollow space in that Jell-O. That would be the lacuna that the grape occupied. So those are spaces. Now, coming out away from the central canal, the blood vessel here, there are connections which will travel to each of these osteocytes and each of these lamella. And they're called canaliculi. Canaliculus is a single one. Canaliculi is plural. It means little canals. That's what the word means. And it looks like a whole lot of little canals there. Let's see if we got a good picture here. Not that one. Let's go up a little bit higher and you see if we get a better one. Well, not really. You can't hardly see them on this real picture. They're very, very, very fine. And one thing that I meant to show you was this one, showing you that the lamella of an osteon here have been telescoped out like a periscope. The one lamella and then the next one inside of it and the next one inside of it have been telescoped, and you can see that the collagen fibers go counterclockwise in one lamella, clockwise in the next, counterclockwise in the next, and that serves to strengthen that bone. It strengthens the bone just like rebar and concrete, and that's what makes bone so very strong. Ossification or osteogenesis. Osteogenesis means the beginning or formation of bone. We have two types we're going to look at. Okay, one is going to be intramembranous ossification, and the other one is going to be endochondral ossification. Okay, let's look at those two. This is the first one, intramembranous ossification. So let's look at what it says here. This type of bone formation occurs in a fibrous membrane. Well, like over here, condensation of mesenchyme into soft sheet permeated with blood vessels, blood capillaries. Embryonic mesenchymal cells differentiate, and mesenchyme is an old term. The newer term for mesenchyme is stem cells. So embryonic stem cells differentiate into osteoblast. Remember, stem cells can become any cell, any tissue in your body. Well, in this area, they are stimulated to become osteoblasts. So that's bone former, right? And form a center of ossification, okay, where bone is going to start being laid down. Osteoblasts secrete a collagen fiber matrix where mineral salts are deposited, and it starts to form spaces, the lacunae, and you really can't see it on any of these pictures here, but here's deposition of osteoid tissue by osteoblast over here. The outermost cells form a periosteum of this. See, here's a fibrous periosteum from which new bone is formed. The inner trap cells are now osteocytes. Formed bones grow in size by the addition of tissue to its surface. This is called appositional growth. Now down here, this is just a continuation of forming this bone in a membrane, and then you have the periosteum on the top and bottom, and you have compact bone on the outsides, and then you have the spongy bone in the middle between these plates. Growth in thickness takes place by the addition of bone to the ends of the diaphysis. Growth in thickness occurs by the deposition of subperiosteal bone on the external surface of the diaphysis and the removal of the inner surface. So as we're talking about this periosteum here is adding bone here on the outside, and this periosteum is adding bone on the outside. See, there's the osteoblast, and the inside is being hollowed out, spongy bone. Now this would be like intramembranous is going to form bones like flat bones. Oh, there it is. Produces flat bones of the skull and the clavicle. Your shoulder blades are flat bones. Your skull has a lot of flat bones that are curved. Ribs, they're a type of flat bone also. So let's look at Endochondral ossification. This means a hyaline cartilage template is covered by a perichondrium, because that means around the cartilage. This template will become ossified. So endochondral ossification. Now this one is showing a cartilage template, hyaline cartilage template. It is just showing a little bit of ossification here, but it would have a perichondrium around it initially. As a blood supply is formed into the perichondrium, you can see right here, here's the blood supply going in right here. They're showing it on this picture. The chondrocytes, the cartilage cells, because chondro is cartilage and cyte is cell, are stimulated to become osteoblasts. So they're changing. They're changing from from a chondrocyte to an osteoblast. Just like a stem cell can change into, an osteoblast or an osteoclast or a muscle cell or whatever. These are changing from chondrocytes to osteoblasts, which are bone builders. Collagen and minerals are laid down in the diaphysis, the shaft. And you can see that it's becoming more and more ossified here. And now the outer covering of this is going to be called the periosteum here, because it's around a bony shaft. So the perichondrium is now called the periosteum. The diaphysis becomes ossified. This is the primary center of ossification. Cartilage cells enlarge and burst, depositing the minerals in the area. Nutrients can't diffuse to the cells and they die. The dead cells and minerals around them is removed, and the center of the diaphysis, from the center of the diaphysis and the medullary cavity is going to be formed. You can see it's hollow here. Blood vessels are going to start entering the epiphyses, the ends of the long bones, both top and bottom, they're proximal and distal, and osteoblasts lay down bone until it reaches the perichondrium where it stops. Now, the ends of the long bones are not going to ossify. So the epiphysis will ossify, but the ends will not. This is where articulation is going to occur. So the ends of long bones contain hyaline cartilage. So I have cartilage remains at the articulating surfaces and at the epiphyseal disc. See, there's epiphyseal plate or the disc right there as the bone's growing. The epiphyseal disc continues to elongate the bone on the diaphyseal end of the bone. So let me get my little pencil here and do red. I'll do a different color. That's already red in there. And it's going to be laying bone down this direction, from this side and this direction from this side. And as it does that, it pushes the epiphyses apart and the bones get longer. So the shaft's getting longer and it's pushing the epiphyses apart. So let's read your notes. The epiphyseal disc continues to elongate the bone on the diaphyseal end, the shaft end of the bone, and forms the neck of the bone and the epiphyseal end. This continues until puberty. Remember, once you start getting your hormones, these epiphyseal plates will ossify and you stop growing. So if you haven't been growing in a few years, these plates have ossified and you will not grow anymore. So let's look at one of those epiphyseal discs, just a profile, a cross-section. Here's a disc, epiphyseal disc or growth plate. So epiphyseal disc, it goes in your blank, contains 4 zones of activity. Okay. It has, your first one is the zone of reserve cartilage. So this is the resting or quiescent zone here. Okay. That's another name for it. On this side, adjoining the epiphysis, it anchors the plate to the epiphysis. This surface has a good blood supply. Okay. Number 2, zone of proliferating cartilage. So it says proliferation zone. Cartilage cells undergoing mitosis. Proliferating means that they're multiplying, they're dividing. This zone functions as an area of cell division and multiplying. The zone replaces the cells that die at the diaphyseal side of the plate. These are being produced to replace the ones that are dying down here. So it's constantly producing new cells that are moving toward the diaphysis to die and become osseous. The zone of hypertrophic cartilage. Here it is, hypertrophic zone. Older cartilage cells enlarge So in your notes, the chondrocytes of this zone enlarge, calcify, and die. Okay, so they're being produced here. They're getting enlarged and filled with mineral matrix and die. And the next one, number 4, is the zone of calcified matrix. Calcification zone. Matrix becomes calcified. Cartilage cells die. Matrix begins deteriorating. So osteocytes remove dead cells and mineral deposits. Then osteoblasts, that's the bone builders, right? And blood vessels invade the area and lay down new bone tissue. Right down here, new bone. The bone elongates until puberty, when the epiphyseal plates stop functioning and becomes the epiphyseal line. Around 18 to 25 years old, this is due to the hormones produced at puberty. And then I have in your notes, the epiphyseal disc is the growth plate of the bone. A break here interrupts the bone the growth rate of the bone. When the break fuses back, the bone may not grow anymore. It just depends on if you destroy the plate. And you may have seen some people that have, one arm that's a little bit shorter than the other one. They probably broke that growth plate sometime earlier in life, and it fused back together, it ossified. And so the growth plate pretty much died and became ossified. Or a leg that is one leg's longer than the other one. There are processes they can do now, surgical procedures they can do now to repair that. I don't have a picture of that. You could look it up, but it has a way of cutting the bone and putting a brace in between the two parts that are cut, sliding them apart, but letting the center part touch. And as long as the bone's touching, it fills in the missing bone, and you can elongate the bones. So you could probably look that up online. This picture here is just showing how much is cartilage. These are little cartilage areas here that are becoming ossified here. So you can see that fetuses are not completely ossified yet. They're slowly becoming osseous. Now you have remodeling in your notes, a continuous process. The bones are replaced about every 7 years. Your bones have reworked themselves and repaired and replaced themselves about every 7 years. Osteoclasts break down bone tissue. Osteoblasts lay down bone tissue. Allows worn or injured bone to be removed and replaced with new bone tissue. Other bone facts. The bones are storage for calcium and phosphates, which are needed for, this is some things you may not have thought about, nerves for impulse conduction, which we'll talk about later, muscles for contraction, calcium's involved in that also, blood for blood clotting, calcium's involved in that, minerals may be removed from bone to meet the needs of the body. When you need calcium and phosphates, they're going to be removed from the bone. When you have plenty in your circulatory system, they're going to be added to your skeletal system. Osteoclasts perform the job of removing minerals from the bone, and osteoblasts perform the process of depositing minerals into the bone. Now, when you get old, there's something called osteoporosis. Too little calcium results in brittle bones which break easily. That's osteoporosis. It means porous bones. And you can see a healthy bone, and look at the spongy bone here. Got a lot of little small spaces here. But you look at osteoporosis where you've lost bone and it's a lot thinner. You can see there's more airspace in here and less connections, and these bones break easier. The osteoblasts are less active due to low sex hormones stimulating the bone formation. So they're not laying down bone as well as they used to. Too much calcium causes thick, heavy bones with a tendency to form bone spurs. They can do that too. You get too much calcium and it will form bumps on your bones, like on your forehead or on your heel or just any bone in particular. And those will not really go away. You have to either have those shaved off or just live with it. So a little bit more information here for bone growth. Vitamins A, C, and D Vitamin A regulates osteoblast and osteoclast activity. Vitamin C, essential for absorption of calcium and phosphates. Vitamin D helps to get calcium from the digestive tract into the blood, so it helps you absorb it from your digestive tract. Now you have a blank. The word that goes in that blank is calcitonin, C-A-L-C-I-T-O-N-I-N, a hormone produced by the parafollicular cells of the thyroid, which inhibits osteoclast, thereby promoting osteoblast. Now the way I kept that straight in my mind was calcitonin, the N, and calci told me that calcium was deposited into the bone. It sounded like calcium in, calcitonin, and so that's going to be osteoblast. Well, parathyroid hormone, P-A-R-A-T-H-Y-R-O-I-D, hormone, a hormone produced by the parathyroid glands, which increases osteoclastic activity, the cells that break bone down to release those minerals into your bloodstream. Now we have types of bones. So I have anatomy of the skeletal elements in your notes. And we have several types. Okay, some are called long bones. That's your first one, long bones, characterized by diaphysis and epiphyses, as well as a marrow cavity in the middle. And I gave you some examples. Bones of the upper arm, see these are long bones. Your lower forearm, those are long bones. That's the radius and ulna. Upper leg, the femur, that's a long bone. Lower leg, these two down here, the tibia and fibula. The bones of your palm, which you can't see on this one too well, but they're long bones also. The soles, the fingers, and the toes, they're all examples of long bones. Next one is short bones. Short bones are box-like in appearance. The external surface is covered with compact bone, and the center is spongy bone. And I gave you some examples. The bones of the wrist, which you have 8 bones in your wrist, and you have 7 bones in your ankle. Those are all called short bones. Then you have flat bones. Flat bones, thin, roughly parallel surfaces of compact bone. So they're going to be flat, like like a piece of paper, and you bend it to form the rounded bones of the skull. So I have roof of the skull, the ribs, the sternum right here in the middle. You call it your breastbone, your sternum, and your scapula. They're on the back, and it's not shown on this picture, but they're your shoulder blades on the back. Irregular bones. Irregular bones have complex shapes with short, flat, notched or ridged surfaces. Example, some bones of the skull are irregular bones, but here's a good one here, a vertebra. They match all those characteristics. Sesamoid bone. Sesamoid means seed. So these are patella. It's a round bone, these little round bones. So it has seed bones, small, round, and flat bones usually embedded in the tendons of the hands, feet, and the knee. The only one that's really named are the ones that are in your knee. Your kneecap is called the patella. You do have them under your thumb and under your big toe, but they're not in predictable numbers, and some people have more or less, so they're not really named other than they're called sesamoid bones. They're not considered to be part of the number of bones in your body, but these are. The sesamoid bones are. Your patella are. And the last one is your sutural bones. Sutural. Now, wormion is in your notes also, but that's an old term. It's a person's name. So let's look at the definition. Small, flat, irregularly shaped bones which occur along a suture line of the skull, usually the lambdoidal suture. Now, the word suture means seam, S-E-A-M, like in clothing. This ties the bones together. So these are called sutures. Now, sutural bones are little bony islands that form in a suture between bones. Most of the time you're going to see them in the back here. This is called the lambdoidal suture back here. And most of the time I've ever seen them, they're always in this lambdoidal suture. And there's one right there. Now we have some surface markings, and they're going to be on several of these 2 pages here. So let's look at the first one's already filled in your note. It's at the very bottom here. Process. Any projection or bump. So any bony prominence, a bump, any bony bump can be called a process. And a lot of the processes that we're going to learn on the skeletal system have this as part of their name. The styloid process, the mastoid process. So we will see that term crop up quite a few times. We have one called, let me see if it's on the next slide, ramus, R-A-M-U-S, arm-like bar of a bone. It means a branch. It's a branch off of a bone, an extension of a bone making an angle to the rest of the structure. Trochanter. Trochanter, that word means to run. And to run is so they're going to put it on the leg, so it is on the leg. A large, rough projection. Very large, blunt, irregularly shaped process. The only examples are on the femur, the leg. Tuberosity. Tuberosity, is smaller than a trochanter. Rough projection, so large rounded projection may be roughened. And then you have a tubercle, which means a little tuberosity is what it means. A small rounded projection or process. Now these structures that are going to use tubercle, tuberosity, and trochanter. You're just going to have to get used to that the people who named these structures used those terms. And the trochanter, meaning to run, is only going to be on the leg. A crest, it's a prominent ridge, so it says a narrow ridge of bone, usually prominent. We will see several crests, like the one on your shin is called the, it can be called a crest or a ridge. On your hips, that's the iliac crest that your belt goes on top of. We'll see that on the bones later on. A line, a narrow ridge of bone, less prominent than a crest. So lines are like little bitty raised thread-like structures. I mean, they're not real prominent, but you can follow them. It's a little bitty raised edge. We have a head. Bony expansion carried on a narrow neck. So where you have a head, you're going to have a neck below it. So your notes here, head, the expanded articular end of an epiphysis, separated from the shaft by a narrow neck. Your next word is condyle. Condyle, a smooth, rounded articular surface. We have several condyles that we will see. And you'll see what I mean. They're like knuckle-like rounded surfaces for articulation. Okay, we don't have a word, but this next one is trochlea, T-R-O-C-H-L-E-A. It means pulley. It's just on your notes, right? It's on your notes. A smooth, rounded groove, or a grooved articular process shaped like a pulley. And we will see several examples of that. Another one, a facet. Facet, a small, flat, articular surface. They're really smooth and they're small and flat, and things usually just slide on those, left and right or forward and backward on a facet. A spine. Oops, wrong way. A spine, a sharp, slender, often pointed projection. So yeah, we will see several spines too. And some of these spines have names, a particular name for them, which we'll look at, one like the spinous process. We have a fossa. Fossa. Shallow basin-like depression in a bone, often serving as an articular surface. So fossa. You have a sulcus, which S-U-L-C-U-S, which is a narrow groove. Okay, a narrow groove, and we will talk about a sulcus when we start naming structures on bones. A real important one to remember is foramen. Here it is at the bottom. Foramen. Foramens are holes, round or oval opening through a bone. It's what blood vessels and nerves go through. A founded passageway for blood vessels and or nerves. A fissure is really like a slit, a narrow slit-like opening. I have an elongated cleft or a slit, and we will see on the skull, we'll see a fissure or two on that. The word meatus, you can substitute meatus for canal. It says canal-like passageway. It's a canal leading through the substance of a bone. So meatus means canal, and you'll be able to use either one of those you want, meatus or canal. And sinus, a cavity within a bone filled with air and lined with a mucous membrane. You have several sinuses in your skull, the frontal sinus in your forehead, and you've had those get inflamed and it gives you a headache. You've had your cheeks hurt. There are sinuses there, maxillary sinuses there also. So when they get inflamed, your teeth hurt. Other than that, we will see this joint again later when we get to the articulations chapter. It's a form of a knee replacement, and I have several, but I don't have one this complex. There are so many different types of knee replacement opportunities now. This is a pretty drastic one here, but they can do partial knee replacements now. They don't replace just a piece of your knee, not the whole thing. And that's it for this set of notes.